Pod to season 2, episode 6, the season finale of our second season of Office Hours with Karpf and Loge. And after season 1, we announced that since we went on the air, we started recording. Things have only gotten worse, and we've continued that trend.
Things are better now. What are you talking about?
We'll get to why they're better. It's funnier if they're worse. I'm Peter Loge.
Things are looking up. Everything's coming up, Millhouse.
I'm Peter Loge, an associate professor at the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University and a strategic consultant. And the co-host is, as always,
Dave Karpf. I'm also an associate professor at GW School of Media and Public Affairs. Not a strategic consultant, just a guy who really tweets probably a little too much. And these days is almost Substacking too much as well.
We'll come to the Substack plug. That'll be like part of the cliffhanger.
Sure.
This is hang on, kids. We've got a lot going on. Thank you, Alana, as always, our producer, who already has put up with a lot of stuff that most of you are never going to hear or see because she's going to politely edit it out. Thank you to our listeners. Rate us, follow us, like us, tell your friends. If you hate this, tell people you don't like and tell them to tune in. We're shouting to the void and need the affirmation. We have a lot going on, Dave. It's been quite the 2 weeks. What do you want to start with? The Inflation Reduction Act?
The Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law, I believe, Tuesday, the day we're recording, it actually happened. A good thing actually happened after I'd given up hope. Generally speaking, I tell everyone not to have hope. People say, no, you're being a little gloomy. And then I turn out to be right. And it sucks because nobody ever wants me to be right. This time, there was really a good reason to say, give up all hope. Joe Manchin this thing. And then instead, Joe Manchin punked the entire Republican Senate caucus. And Kyrsten Sinema didn't screw it up. Well, she screwed it up a little, but she overall didn't screw it up. And so we're doing something significant on climate. We have figured out that at least one of the major tranches of what we need to do to respond to the climate crisis is just spend a ton of money. And so we are spending not a full ton, but like 3/4 of a ton of money to help build the infrastructure and start the economic engines of new industries that are going to help us get to net zero by 2050. So this is genuinely exciting news.
This is a very big deal. You got to have hope, which is going to be a clip and a video that's going to go in the footnotes, peterloge.com podcast or on Medium. But the name is deceptive though, right? Because apparently the Inflation Reduction Act will have very little impact on inflation. It will have a huge impact on climate, which is not mentioned in the title. I talked to one person who's been following this very closely who says we should just call it the Joe Manchin Act and give credit where it's due and be honest about what it's about. There are two sets of lessons though. One is the comms of how we get into it and the comms of what we do next. You've been working on environmental issues and strategic communications on the environment for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. How did we get to a point where we actually won?
I want to note, while I've done this for a long time, but I also at this point haven't done it for a long time. I got off the Sierra Club board in 2010, so it's now been a dozen years. And I want to note that because there are people with really detailed answers who have been on the ground working on this long after I went off and became a professor instead. Credit to them. David Roberts, by the way, has a fantastic podcast up called Volts. That's worth listening to for all of the details. We can put that in the show notes as well. But it seems like one of the important things was a recognition that climate was never going to be bipartisan. And that meant that you needed to have the entire Democratic coalition together enough that the backbiting would be small. And then you needed to have enough solidarity to get it through. Now, how did we actually get it through when it looked like Manchin just wasn't going to go there? That's a mystery to me. I know there's a lot of sort of very narrow tactical stuff. From what I'm reading, it seems like the announcement a few weeks ago that Biden was considering declaring a climate emergency, while I think he was genuinely considering it, was also a tactic to get Manchin to come back to the table. You needed activists howling about this and making it a big enough issue that it seemed like a big betrayal. And then you needed the inside game of Biden pressuring him, of Schumer sitting down with him. It sounds like Larry Summers sat down with him and said, what you were saying about inflation is actually wrong. So those inside connections mattered a lot too. You needed both halves of that. So you needed all of that, but this is, I mean, passing this is a tremendous enough achievement that it represents 4 or 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears from people who worked real hard, and then on top of that also had to get pretty lucky. It's hard to replicate that kind of thing.
So I think you hit on a couple of things that I think are super important and good lessons for comms people. We have a lot of listeners who are students who can learn from this, and a lot of people, a lot of our listeners are working professionals who've seen this up close. One is it takes a long time, right? Change happens super, super slowly, right? People have been talking about climate since at least the 70s, right? It's been a big deal. Al Gore won an Academy Award for basically a slide deck about climate. People have been making a lot of noise. A very good slide deck, an Academy Award worthy slide deck, but basically a slide deck. But it's agenda status, right? This matters, this matters, this matters, this matters. So now it just becomes normalized that it matters. The second part is then the activists keeping pushing on the outside, right? You need the protests, you need op-eds, you need people writing on it, you need people campaigning on it, you need the noise to create political space that then allows the inside game to happen, right? So the lobbyists or the people you've never heard of and you will never see can walk around the building saying, all that crazy noise, those people are kind of nuts, but you know, they've got a bit of a point here. And you create space for others to move into, and that then creates space or demand for these other conversations between Senator Schumer, maybe the White House, maybe Senator Manchin, right? And none of them on their own do it, right? It's all of these elements, and smart strategic communications campaigns, I think, either create that up front, the inside outside game, right? You and I have both done this, where something's happening, you want legislators to pay attention to it. So you time events around a congressional recess, you time events in a handful of congressional districts, maybe some op-eds, maybe visiting a legislator, maybe getting the tour facility. During recess, the lobbyists inside visit the Hill and visit the staffers and talk about this legislation that's happening. The member comes back to the first ledge meeting and says, hey, every time I turned around, I was getting asked about X. There was an op-ed about X. What's going on with X? And the staffer says, it's funny you should mention that. I was just talking to this person from this organization we trust. They've got a bill on X. We should get on the bill. The member then goes back and gets on the bill, right? Simplified version of it. Environmental version of it is longer, much more complicated. But I think that the important lesson here is all of this, and the other two parts you talked about are timing and luck. Like those play just an outsized role in any campaign I've worked on or run. Like who happens to be in office? What else happens to be going on? What else happens to be on the agenda? And when the lucky moment strikes, you've got to be ready to take advantage of it, right? You can't wait for your moment and say, oh, hey, we should probably do something about this moment. You got to have the stuff ready to go. I think these are some of the important lessons, even if we don't know exactly what happened. Those are the key elements I think comms people can learn from. Does that make sense?
I think that's right. The one thing I would add is this highlights to me the importance of serious coalition management, right? Like it stands out to me that particularly compared to the failed climate bill during the first Obama administration, which was back when I was still doing this work. It is remarkable how the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the activist left were willing to be flexible. There was never a point at which they said, we are going to spike the bill. There were times where they were grousing because there were reasons to grouse, but they recognized the boundaries of the possible. They pushed, they made noise, but they also, like, that flexibility is something which doesn't come naturally to like any broad coalition, particularly when it is something that is this high stakes and this complicated. That takes years and years of internal trust building and coalition work, which is the stuff that you do when it isn't your moment in the sun. Like along with all the activism to try to get ready for the moment that you can seize, you're not just sort of like pounding on the windows and trying to get attention. You are also building the trust that is required so that when it comes down to it and you need to hold the line together, you can do that. And I'm amazed at how they pulled that off. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Well, part of it is also then demonstrating to elected officials that those coalitions have got your back. They're not going to come after you, and that it's not electorally dangerous to do this. So I was up there. You're talking about cap and trade in 2009,
Yeah.
right on the heels of the Affordable Care Act, right? So I was, as a favor to a friend, I went back to work on the Affordable Care Act, mostly doing the politics of it. I was handling some other high profile stuff, including I think it was cap and trade. And it wasn't going to go anywhere in the Senate. Like the bill was not going to pass the Senate. And the White House and Speaker Pelosi were demanding members of the House take a hard vote on a hard piece of legislation on the heels of or in the middle of the Affordable Care Act debates for a piece of legislation that was going to fail. Mm-hmm. And the level of anger and bitterness among at least the people I talked to, and certainly with me and people in my office was super high. It's like, mm-hmm. You're asking us to do something that's politically hard, for which there's no policy upside because it's going to fail. And this is on the heels of something that is politically and policy hard that might fail. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think it's creating this environment like, if you do this, we promise you're probably going to be okay and we'll try to protect you. Mm-hmm. Is super, like members of Congress, Senate offices, House offices simply had to trust this process. Right. And I think they're getting it. And the progressive caucus and progressives are taking credit as they should. Third way, and the moderates are taking credit as they should. Larry Summers is like, let everybody take credit because everybody had a hand in this everybody had a hand in this. Mm-hmm. So the other question was, now what? We celebrate, but it ain't over. What are the comms lessons coming out of it? What do we do next? What are the comms things to do next?
I mean, for the climate movement, we are now, this is mid-August. So everybody's about to move into electoral mode. And the real answer is, okay, go work elections, try to make the 2022 election less bad than it might otherwise be, right? Like, it is incredibly unlikely that Democrats in the climate movement are going to look back at 2022 and say that was a real step forward. But the question is, can it be a smaller step back? Can Democrats hold the Senate? I can't even say, can Democrats hold the House because of gerrymandering? Can Democrats at least keep the House very, very, very close? And then really you're waiting until after the smoke is clear, right? Like mid-November is when you can then come together and say, all right, what do the next 2 years look for us? Because any planning that you do now is going to be so contingent on what's the national possibility space that you're not really doing anything.
See, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that. Because I think Republicans are already saying we're going to roll back this stuff. We're going to impeach and attack everybody. So you know that the Republicans, assuming the Republicans are going to take the House, you can predict who the chairs are going to be or what the agenda is going to be. So you can find the pieces of the legislation you think they're going to go after first. I would find ways to protect those now. How do we promulgate rules immediately? How do we embed things immediately? How do we start doing comms to inoculate against the attacks we know were coming? The specifics of that will change, right? The number of seats in the House, the committee, the exact committee makeup, who goes to jail between now and January, whatever. But I think the broad contours we know, and you should be already inoculating, pre-writing, really just getting as much of this stuff embedded in law and rule as possible to just make it as hard as possible, both politically and as a policy matter, to undo.
So here's where I'd split the difference. I think that's right if you're the administration, right? Like the administration has just gotten something signed into law. Let's start getting it locked in so that it is hard to undo by an angry committee chair in the House. If you're the Sierra Club, if you're Sunrise, you've got less agency over that. You're doing more public comms to activists and to media. And so you have less of a role setting that into law. What you can do instead is brag about the victory, do a bit of a victory lap and talk about how this is a big deal so that it in the public mind is a thing that was done. But then again, we are now moving into one of the fast parts instead of the slow parts, where what happens in November matters an awful lot for what comes next. So the focus, I think, for them turns to November.
I think the focus has to be on November, but hopefully the November team has been working alongside the lobbying team. I mean, you just have to be able to do these things at the same time. And I do think, though,
big organizations, they are.
Yeah. Right, of course. But I really disagree, though. I think I would be planning a conference in mid-January, early January that says, here's where we're going next on climate. Here's the next piece on energy independence, on sustainability, on whatever it is. And not just brag about, hey, we won, but here are things that are good because we won. Here are the positive outcomes. You're just telling this positive story. Otherwise, the Republicans or opponents will get to walk into really a messaging vacuum in January and go, ha, crazy climate people want to ban meat again, right? And
They're going
absent,
to say that no matter what.
right, but absent a counter narrative, it's easier to say, right? I would be out there saying, and it doesn't have, I mean, you don't wait until you're hit to defend yourself.
Sure, but again, to me, this comes down to who is positioned to really do that counter narrative. Like, if you are in one of the industries that suddenly is getting an awful lot of investment, like, yes, start building stuff up. If you're the administration, start helping to fashion stories about how we're getting good paying American jobs out of this, out of the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, do that work. If you're a grassroots environmental organization, you can look at state and local, you can figure out, like, at the state and local level, are there things that we can start storytelling on? But like, there's no messaging vacuum in partisan media, which is where they're mostly going to be telling the story, because it's just full of whatever it is that Tucker is saying on any given night. And so I think they're going to say whatever they were going to say at CPAC, they're going to say anyway, and it's immaterial what reality is, because they haven't cared about reality in at least 20 years. And so, yeah, like, lock in those wins where you can, make it harder to tear this thing down. But I do think if you're the administration, I think there's a lot of work to be done around telling that story. If you're advocacy organizations, I just think you're less in that particular room, at least for the next few months.
I think that makes sense, but you still got to, but if you maintain the coalition and you keep the coalition talking to each other and trading information, and the administration says, look, what are people hearing? We're pushing out this messaging. What are you hearing? And maybe the industry groups or the environmental groups come back and say, here's what we're hearing. We're hearing A, we really need more B out of you. Or, industry groups go to environmentalists and activists saying, look, we feel like we've now been thrown overboard. We want to continue fighting for this, but we really need some more grassroots cover. Can you give us a bit more cover? So the coalition continues to do some of that background work, just to continue to, like, you just don't go home, right? You don't say, hey, I just won the nomination, I'm going to take a week off before running for president. And, I think you got to keep going.
Sure.
All right. Keeping it tight, keep moving. We are now moving to, we need a good name for the Muckalago, the Mara train wreck, Mara. How does it not bother all these right-wing crazy people that Mar-a-Lago is actually not an English word?
About Mara, are you kidding me?
Mara, are you kidding me? That's good. I like that. But it has to have the accent. I'm going to insist on the accent.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yowza. You know what I'm saying? So, messaging lessons coming into and coming out of Mara, are you kidding me?
I mean,
it's better with the accent. It really is.
So I don't think it starts with mess. Like, it.
We're a comms podcast.
Yeah, but it's a political podcast too. And look, the dude is in trouble with the Espionage Act.
And that seems bad.
It's like, we don't know exactly what the top secret stuff is, nor will we, because he didn't declassify it by thinking declassification thoughts. Right? Like, this is people have been making the joke on Twitter about this, is like Michael Scott from the Office yelling, "I declare bankruptcy," but for declassification. This entire thing is ridiculous in the same way that the entire 4 years of his presidency was ridiculous. It's also criminal in the same way that all 4 years of his presidency were criminal. And we're still facing the fundamental question that we've always faced of, do you actually hold him accountable the way you would hold any other human being accountable, given the very real political calculus that his supporters will go and burn shit down, right? Like, they're already threatening the FBI. And also, if it turns to a jury trial, it's pretty hard to find a full jury that doesn't include one Trumpist who just says like, but he's my Lord and Savior, we can never convict. So the Justice Department still has to face all of that. And they have to balance that against, you don't really have the rule of law if laws don't apply to the head of one of the two parties just because his supporters like him and are violent, right? Like this is a no-win situation, but also a no-win situation in which it seems to me kind of like how Elon Musk for years and years has thumbed his nose at the SEC, and what are you going to do? It's just the SEC. And now he's thumbing his nose at contract law, and in October he's going to the Delaware Chancery Court. And most likely what he's going to find out is that securities law is soft and contract law is really hard. Like, I think Elon Musk is in a lot of trouble because he's about to find out that you kind of can't fuck around with the Delaware Chancery Court and contract law. I think we very well might be in a situation where, while the Justice Department could kind of overlook, hell, even January 6th, they probably can't overlook, you took nuclear secrets, we told you to return them, your lawyer swore that you returned them, we have video of who was going in and out of the unsecured place where you were storing them at your club. Like, it's very possible that that's just so far along that now we're going to see a real trial because of the Espionage Act. So, and from that will come the convalescence of what do you do when now actually Donald frickin' Trump, who of course at that point will announce that he's running for president, whether he planned to or not, like the front runner for the Republican presidency and still the guy who runs the entire Republican Party, is now being investigated for doing really serious crimes. Like, the comms lessons are going to flow from that. But like, I don't think we can get comms lessons unless we start with all that, because that's the objective reality shape and everything.
So I think there are a couple of things. First is, glad you finally got the Elon Musk reference in, because it took you 20 minutes to get there.
Well, you know, I had to talk to you first about all the things you were wrong about with the IRA.
I mean, it's all the good news. Really distracts from the Elon Musk bashing.
I'm not used to it.
You're not used to it. And Yang is like come and gone. And that, so we can't really beat up the silliness, which is forward, whatever that was. I think there are a couple of the comms piece is like super tricky of this, I think, on the front end. First of all, the Justice Department, when the warrant wasn't released, and it really was just a vacuum, the internet, cable TV, podcasters, social media abhor a vacuum and then fill that vacuum. They're not releasing it because fill in your favorite conspiracy theory, fill in your favorite whatever, right? So everybody, absent information, people fill information, in part because you got to fill space, you got to fill time, but also in part because that's what people do, right? We're storytellers. We make sense of the world. This big thing happened. We're going to make sense of it. It's a conspiracy theory. Finally, they're getting it to get him. Merrick Garland's been playing the long game, whatever. We're in the same position now, right? Because the DOJ is not releasing another set of documents because they say it'll risk of further other ongoing investigations, which then is allowing people to then fill in whatever they want. And that's a tougher comm situation, right? And then whatever happens next, right? You're right. Somebody's going to have to explain it, and we're all going to bring our own explanations to it. And it's finally going to be the rule of law is finally winning, or Trump really is above the law, or whatever. All right, that gets super hard. I do think, as a candidate matter and as a campaign matter, I thought Matt Iglesias had an interesting couple of tweets, I want to say a week ago, suggesting that when Democrats talk about this, and they've got to tie it to something that actually resonates with voters, right? So The Hill called me last week about this and how was the media covering it. And I had a few minutes to prepare for the interview. So I went to the websites of the first two local newspapers that occurred to me: the Arizona Republic, because they did Arizona politics for a while, and the Columbus Dispatch, neither of which were talking about the warrant or the investigation. Arizona, unsurprisingly, was talking about water, right? Because water matters a huge amount in Arizona, right? So it's just not connecting, right? So all of us are talking about it because it's a really big deal. This is like a fundamental threat to democracy, which is something in which you and I have invested our entire lives. Most people have they want stuff to work. They want how much does gas cost? How do I get my kids to school? And so Iglesias, he said he'd been talking to Democratic friends or Democratic colleagues, saying that we need to say, these insiders think the rules don't apply to them, so they don't have to pay taxes, or they want to continue to rig the rules so the rule of law doesn't apply to rich people. There's got to be a therefore you care because it's tangible, as opposed to therefore you care because in the grand arc of how humans govern themselves, democracy stumbles around less and is less awful than the other forms.
Yeah, so I have three thoughts. One is focusing on local papers in 2022 just feels very dated to me. They've got like 3 staffers left at each of those papers, right?
Nevertheless, but it's a reflection of what people care about in those areas.
Or at least a reflection of what is remaining in the niches that they cover.
Yeah, or the algorithm sent to me in Washington, D.C. from Arizona, who knows? But the point is, like, it's the best, given 15 minutes, it's the furthest I could get away from my bubble was to Google the Arizona Republic and the Columbus Dispatch.
So the thing I want to push on, though, is this is messy drama. Like, Donald Trump's one superpower in his 4 years in office and when he was running for presidency was that sort of reality television sensibility of all of the attention will be on me at all times, without any of that instinct of trying to make it like he tells a good story about how, like, oh, the deep state is against me, I am here for you people. It's sort of the authoritarian shtick. But mostly it's just, here's a bunch of messy drama. And we are a national culture that has now had, Survivor started airing, in like 99 or so?
Oh
We've now had 20 plus years of marinating in reality TV messy drama. And it's enough of the culture that even if the Columbus Dispatch isn't putting that on the front page, the drama of it is still going to attract a fair amount of attention. And while I generally like that, I generally think that messaging is right about the rules should apply to everybody, and this is just like how they don't want to pay their taxes. What makes this a little different is it's a threat to democracy if the rules don't apply to him. Taking the nuclear secrets and showing it off in the club, that's actually only indirectly a threat to democracy. That's a threat to the nation state, right? Like, it's not that we can't have a democracy if you give away our secrets. It's our system of spies and intelligence gathering gets weakened if you hand that shit off to all the spies who pay the club fee so that they can come to Mar-a-Lago. Like that, even if we were not a democracy, the nation state is worse off.
Well, then
so that connection is actually a little frayed here in a way that, on January 6th, it's very clear.
Well, I think it's clear here, though, because he also released the names of 2 FBI agents.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think that's right. It's like people's lives. He's putting the lives of law enforcement and national security officials in danger. Like, that's a tie. That's a thing I can grab onto.
But it's not about democracy so much as the nation state.
Right.
But there's messy drama here of seriously, dude, you just decided to hold on to some top secret documents at Mar-a-Lago. That's messy drama. And we do get serious national attention cycles to that in a way that isn't necessarily about bigger things, or at least isn't about the normal bigger things. The other thing I want to point out in terms of where this is going, we're going to see some weird transparency lines, because absolutely a beat that's going to come in a few weeks or a month from now is Trump supporters are going to insist that you and I, we the people, ought to be able to decide how bad it was what was in these documents. And then the government is going to say, no, we're not going to read the top secret documents into the public record, the fucking top secret documents. Then they're going to say, aha, what are you hiding? That is basically going to be a 15-minute bit played on repeat on Hannity and on Tucker Carlson.
Yep.
And it's obvious, and it's going to be effective because people are going to say, well, what are they hiding? And the answer is top secret shit. I don't know, because it's only 7 people are allowed to see it, but they do that for a reason. And so that's going to be a thing that's awkward here, because again, it's not about electoral democracy in the way that so much of his other crimes are. This is just basic, what weird, prima donna mafia don shit were you pulling? But also, once again, to go back to the Musk thing, like you really probably can't break the Espionage Act in the way that you can break electoral democracy, because the entire security structure is set up to punish people on this, and that's just difficult to get around.
I think you're right. I think that's absolutely right, which creates a comms challenge that we saw when this whole thing broke, which is absent information, people will fill in information that makes the best sense to them, that reinforces their worldview. And for a whole lot
and
of
this is the
people,
one space where the information is going to stay absent because like it's top secret. Like, no, we're not going to tell you that.
right?
Like the stuff that if they anything that they declassify can be FOIA'd. So no, him waving a magic mind wand saying, no, it was declassified because I took it and I said so. Like his supporters can say that it's wrong, but also it's not like we'll then get to see it because they're not gonna, like, investigative journalists are gonna FOIA all this stuff. The government's just gonna be like, haha, we get it, but like, no, really, it's really not declassified. That's important. Like we do have an overclassification problem in general in the government, but I think we can trust that this isn't that the reason why they wouldn't rated him is because he took a bunch of shit that he's really not allowed to have. What he was doing with it, we're going to find out. It's going to be messy drama.
So those are the comms, messy comms. Stay tuned. That's the cliffhanger for season 3, which starts in 2 weeks. But before we get to season 3 and the wrap up, Dave, we can have predictions. We're going to have a look ahead. There's some freaky news and things that scare me because I know you're all happy this week and like you're the guy with a halo. Things that are freaking me out. This is, I don't know if it's freaking me out, but I find it entertaining. Gina Lollobrigida, who you've apparently never heard of, 95 years old, thinking about running for parliament in Italy, which is weird. Apparently there's a problem with Trump-shaped ecstasy out there. So any of you kids taking the MDMA, first of all, don't. And then second, avoid the Trump-shaped stuff, because apparently that's bad. And there are 5-foot bats in Singapore. So like you might feel good about the Inflation Reduction Act. I have a lot of things I'm afraid of. But I do want to have a look ahead. So my prediction.
You the downer amongst the two of us.
I am like,
I'm like, something finally good happened for the first time in years, and you're like, there's 5-foot bats in Singapore.
It's a twist at the end of season 2. It's like it's a thing at the end of Stranger Things. It makes you go, wait, hang on, we've got to come back. But I do
find out what happened to the murder hornets, by the way.
The murder that's so 17 or something.
That's 2020.
That's 2020.
We never heard about the murder hornets again. I'm still waiting.
I don't know. They're on a comeback tour, I think, aren't they? They're.
I don't know.
I think they're on a comeback tour. They're playing the 930 Club. Here's my prediction though. I have a Mar-a-Lago prediction.
Oh God.
I have a Mar-a-Lago prediction. You had to see that coming. My Mar-a-Lago prediction: they're going to find Andy Kaufman.
Say what?
They're going to find Andy Kaufman. They're going to go through, and finally, they're going to find Andy Kaufman.
You think Andy Kaufman is hanging out in Mar-a-Lago?
I was convinced he was Trump, and he was just at the inaugural just going to rip off the mask and go, "Aha! It's been Andy Kaufman." But that didn't work. So clearly, he's hiding in the basement. What are you looking for? What are you plugging? For the love of God, get us out of this podcast.
I'm Substacking a lot. I'm getting a little spicy on Substack, so people should please follow me there. My last post was telling Substack to stop being assholes, so I'm just waiting for them to cut off my access. I'm like, oh, this hand is feeding me a little bit. Let me bite it. So I'm writing a lot on Substack, mostly about tech stuff instead of StratCon stuff. Mostly about tech stuff. Follow me there, and I would say over the next few months, the thing I'm going to be watching for, like right now, the vibes are real good for Democrats in the November election. John Fetterman is daily wiping the floor with Dr. Oz, because Dr. Oz and his comms team are hilariously bad at campaigning, and Fetterman is good. So I think we're going to keep on seeing some good news beats. What I expect that's going to cool off between now and November. I don't think we're going to get to ride this high for an entire 3 months, but I'm going to see how long we can ride it and how good it gets.
I think that's really good insight, and it comes back to what you said about a lot about the climate stuff at the beginning, which is a lot of it is luck and a lot of it is timing. I am on Twitter at PLOGE. All the footnotes, including the other podcasts, as Dave continues to plug, will be on peterloge.com/podcast and also on Medium. Thank you for tuning in to 2 seasons of Office Hours with Karpf and Loge, for following us, for rating us, for telling your friends. Look for season 3 starting starting in 2 weeks. We're just keeping the same. We just decided arbitrarily we're done.
Well, it's
season
because
two.
season 3 is when the semester is actually going, so we can make fun of our students on this podcast. We can't do that over the summer.
Tune in 2 weeks to
Tune
find out
in
which among
to
you
find
we
out
don't
whether
actually
we
like.
actually make fun of our students.
Yeah, which of you we don't actually like very much. Maybe you should ask someone else for a recommendation for law school. We're kidding. We love all of you the same. I put all of your
Most of
papers-
you, except for one, and you know what you did.
you know who you are. Thank you always, Alana. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, the pod listeners. See you in 2 weeks.